God. Hi everyone, and welcome to the very last day of the very first South by Southwest London. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I recognize some faces that I've seen along the week at screenings. And thank you for joining us for this very special screen keynote. My name is Anna Bukutska. I'm the head of screen here at South by London and current sitting president of the Flanagan fan club. So this is a doubly exciting event for me personally. Mike Flanagan is one of the most accomplished contemporary storytellers across film and television, mostly known in the horror genre. His adaptations of revered texts like The Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, The Fall of the House of Usher, Midnight Club, as well as his own original work with Midnight Rams and Hush, have garnered him an almost fanatical fandom across the horror community and beyond. We'll be talking about his work across film, television, and of course a lot of horror. So please put your hands together and welcome to the stage to Mike Flanagan. It's a long walk.
It's a much longer walk than I thought.
Yeah.
How you doing? I'm really glad you guys are here. South by Southwest.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure, and I'm sure the audience will have a lot of questions for you in a minute, but I'm going to be greedy to start and ask you a couple of my own. So, Mike, just to kick off kind of more generally, your work has really become synonymous with an emotional breadth of horror storytelling. Can you take us back to the first horror story that terrified you personally?
Okay, so the first horror story that terrified me, like on screen or on the page?
Whichever way you want to interpret that.
Because on the page, it was Stephen King's It, which I read way too young. But on screen, it was an episode of Fraggle Rock, and it's not getting right. They had an episode of They had several. It was a runner. They had a whole runner about this thing on Fraggle Rock called the Terrible Tunnel, and it was this horrible space the Fraggles weren't allowed to go in, and if they did go in, the little ghosts of the deceased Fraggles were trapped in the walls. I don't know what Fraggle Rock was up to with this, but it was traumatizing.
And you know what? I wonder as well. There's a part of the industry, both across film and television, that has always really struggled to accept horror as a legitimate and recognized form of storytelling, particularly when dealing with deep emotions for characters and well-drawn characters. And I think that your work has really been instrumental in changing that shift. And I wonder, from your perspective, have you noticed that shift since you started working with Absenthian, Oculus, and now with Carrie that you're prepping right now, and with The Life of Chuck that we're premiering later tonight? Have you noticed that shift from your perspective?
I completely agree with you at that. I think there has been kind of a misperception of what horror can be and what genre filmmaking in general can be. I do think that genre storytelling tends to struggle to get that credibility. And it's funny because people will talk about how surprising it is. And it's like, oh, but this horror movie has great characters and it has a really well-developed thematic through line. And kind of every year you see these movies break out. And a lot of people outside of the genre remain perpetually surprised that it's like, yeah, there's a really good story in here. It isn't just about the scares. I think that's always kind of been the case because, horror was one of the first really popular genres in film. It goes through these cycles and keeps breaking out with really impressive pieces of work. But then the industry, and to some extent, some audiences then tend to reset and will be surprised again that, yeah, it's just as dramatically viable and complex and beautifully artistic as any other genre. It's just in how you do it. And I think, unfortunately, there is a bias against horror in particular. But I think, there are so many amazing filmmakers who are pushing back against that. And, every now and then when you see Jordan Peele win an Academy Award, and everyone talks about, oh, this legitimized the horror genre. It's like, yeah, it did. And then they forget. I think that is unfortunate. But for me, there's no more vital genre. Whenever the genre, whatever type of storytelling you're doing, you want to connect with something that's relatable emotionally. And whether we like it or not, I tend to think the first emotion every one of us experienced was fear. We show up helpless and tiny and with no idea what's happening around us, and we're immediately scared. And then we're comforted, we hope. But I think that feeling is, you look for something that connects people regardless of where they live, their culture, their upbringing, their beliefs. We all know what it's like to be scared in the dark. And I think that's why horror is so incredible, because it lets us peer into that in a safe way. And it encourages us to be braver. By the time the credits roll, we've exercised courage in this very controlled little burst. And along the way, we can talk about things that otherwise are much harder to talk about in entertainment. And the one I always kind of point to is if George Romero wanted to make a film about racism in America in the 60s, he could have made that film. And it would have spoken to people who are interested in having that conversation. But instead, he made Night of the Living Dead. And people went to be scared of the zombies. And in the last moments, you realize the story he's been telling. And that story then reaches a much wider audience and has much more impact. I think that's the beauty of horror. You get to talk about incredible things that if you were to just do it without the wrapping of the genre, you would radically limit its reach and its impact. So, yeah, I'm sorry, that was a rambling answer to your question.
When you're writing, particularly these very long pieces of text that are meant to be read out loud, they're not meant to be read on the page. They're meant to be listened. They're meant to, as you were just saying, create a story and also give us an insight into the life of a character, the inside life of a character that sometimes, is hidden underneath their actions. How do you approach writing them? How that balance of writing something and having to clip words or present them in a way that is not meant, let me rephrase. When you're writing a monologue for the page, it's very different when you're writing it to be read out loud. How do you approach it, and how do you find the musicality of the monologues?
It's very iterative, and I've always overwrite them to start. And you're completely right. How they read and how they sound are two very different things. I'll read them out loud. I'll hate to read them out loud. I love to hear actors, once they're cast, I hear it in their voice, because it is musical. And when you change the voice, you change the instrument. The words can be the same, but they will land very differently. And even then, I still don't know. I do my best to try to make them as succinct as they can be. I don't want to use too many words. I don't want it to be overwritten. I don't want it to, there's a pretension that creeps in. And I try very hard to not let it do that. But sometimes something on the page, I don't believe in it truly. And I have no idea how it'll go until I hear it on set. And the biggest example of that, there's a monologue in Hill House in the finale. And it was like, oh man, like 2 pages. It was all about time and the moments of our lives and how we imagined the dead in the show experienced time and looking back at life. And we talked about time being like dominoes and time being like rain and time being like snow and like all these metaphors are creeping in. And I didn't know how to land it. And the thing that I wrote was meant to be temporary until I found something better. And I could never crack it. And I thought for sure it wouldn't live. And I showed it to Kate. I was like, I really don't know about this last line. And the last line was, the rest is confetti. And I said, I like it. I really like it on the page, but I don't think this is going to work. And I think it kind of might bump people out of the monologue. And then Victoria Pedretti said it. And I was like, we're good. But I was ready to cut that line up until the day we shot it. I was ready and had no idea what I'd replace it with. So I ultimately try to iterate them enough and to test drive them enough to have an idea of whether I think we're doing something good or bad. But you're never going to know until the actor says it in the light, in the shot. You never really can tell.
Oh, I thought you were breaking my voice.
I could probably
Good question. Thank you. Go ahead, Chad.
So I'm interested in the differences between doing horror on film or TV. So, for example, with Carrie, you'll have like more time to play with, but you're also in people's living rooms. So, will that mean it's more likely to be scarier in different ways, or like how will it compare doing something on TV compared to film?
It's a great question. The question is the difference between horror for film and television. They're completely different. Completely. You're absolutely right. When you're doing TV, you're in someone's home and they are surrounded by distractions. We've also been trained to let television be as passive an experience as possible. And every platform, every channel, every streamer is very incentivized to make it so that you will keep watching while you do other things, because they don't want you to turn it off. They want you to just keep going. And so creating TV very frequently is about how to put, not for me, but for a lot of people, how to put something on that people will be happy to kind of passively enjoy while they're checking their phone, eating a meal, doing their laundry. It's very different. Horror is really hard to do on TV for that reason, because horror relies on you completely hijacking a viewer's senses. You need to control what they see, what they hear. When you make it silent, it's because that is going to be what makes the scare work, and you cannot control the ambient sound in someone's living room while they're watching. The other thing is that a feature film provides a structure where you can create tension, release tension, create more tension, relieve a little bit, and it peaks and it ends, and it's in a contained kind of expected length of time that you're stressing people out. On TV, you need to somehow sustain tension for 8 hours, 10 hours. It's really difficult, which is why you don't see much horror television. And when I took Hill House out as a pitch, there were studios who were emphatic that the genre doesn't work on TV. My approach to it has always been unchanged, which is don't focus on the horror, focus on the characters. If you can glue people to the set because of the character drama, then you have a much better chance of tearing their eyes away from their phone and kind of hijacking that environment that they're in. It's never the same thing. The tools that you use are completely different. The audio mix is completely different. The camera work is completely different. It's much harder to get someone's attention and to keep it. Yeah.
Have a question right here? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, and this is a very simple question. I love absolutely everything that you've ever done from Absentia to now. You're my favourite director of all time. And I love that everything you do makes me sob hysterically. But I was just wondering, do you think that you will ever do a sort of balls-to-the-wall fun horror film that doesn't emotionally cripple your...
Okay. Will I ever do a horror film that's fun and balls to the wall and doesn't emotionally cripple the viewer? I tried. It was Ouija 2. I mean, it's Ouija 2, you know? I wasn't setting out to do anything but make Ouija 2. And it was really fun. And whenever the DP and I would kind of hit anything, we would just remind each other, like, it's Ouija 2, man. It's fine. The bar is ankle high. We're going to be fine. And even then, when I was writing the ending, I was like, and here is where she's reunited with the ghost of her dead father. And Lena realizes she's going to spend the rest of her life alone. God damn it, what is wrong with me? It's Ouija 2. how hard is it to just do Ouija 2? And then the funny thing is that it really underperformed compared to Ouija 1. So I killed that franchise, which I still have to apologize to Jason Blum for every time I see him. But yeah, so will I don't know. It's the Stephen King problem. It's that I really believe the fun balls to the wall horror needs to still have characters that are real and well drawn, and inevitably, it's about extreme emotions. And if it's going to be balls to the wall scary, it has to have an equal weight on the heart. You know, I've been working on The Exorcist for a while now, which my whole pitch on it was, I'm not going to monologue about religion. I already did that. And a different thing, I want to make the scariest movie I've ever made. And even then, and I can't spoil it, but even then, I'm like, you're going to cry. So yeah, I'll keep trying. I can't promise though.
Let's try to get through as many questions as possible. Let's go to you over there on the island. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for casting Snap's lawyer as Margaret White. But also, how do you deal with grief yourself now that you've dealt with grief a lot in
The question is, how do you deal with grief yourself now that you've dealt with grief in so many of your projects?
The answer is I deal with it in the projects, which I know is kind of a circular answer, but it's very true. And I don't know better than anyone else how to deal with or process grief and loss. I really have no idea. And I've tried very hard to figure it out by telling these stories. And so The Haunting of Hill House, the story was born because of a suicide in my family. And that's kind of where the Nell storyline came from. And there are images in that are dreams and nightmares I had kind of during that time. So that show is me trying to deal with grief and loss. I'm going to be dealing with it forever. We all are. Having a creative outlet to try and pour that into has been incredibly therapeutic. And I hope it's therapeutic for people going through a similar enough situation that maybe some of the things that helped me in the process might help them. But, it's like, I'm not even aware of it half the time. It took me forever to figure out when I was working on Midnight Mass that I was writing about my own alcoholism. That took me way too long to recognize, but that's where I dealt with it. And in Dr. Sleep as well. I thought I was like, I'm dealing with Stephen King's alcoholism. And that was there's one specific scene in Dr. Sleep that doesn't appear in any of the iterations, isn't from either novel or Kubrick, and it's a scene in the Gold Room bar between Ewan McGregor and Henry Thomas. It's the reason I wanted to make the movie. And I didn't know it, but my wife, when she read that scene, will tell you that she knew reading it that I was going to get sober. I had no idea. So a lot of the things I deal with in the work are I'm the last to put it together. Even like I opened talking about the terrible tunnel in Fraggle Rock, where all the Fraggles go in the tunnel and disappear. It took me years before someone had to point out to me that the first time I made a horror movie with Absentia, I just did the terrible tunnel. I went all the way back to the thing that scared me the most as a kid. I didn't know I was doing it, but that Fraggle Rock thing really did traumatize me. And I really had to deal with it in my 30s. And that's what that movie was. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. But I wish I knew how to deal with those things in another way, but I'm glad I have the platform to do it this way.
I fear that we have no more time for questions, but it feels like a really beautiful moment to start and to end on Fraggle Rock. Mike Flanagan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.